call came in at 2:17 a.m., a child's whisper begging for help before the line went dead. Officer Daniel Reyes thought it was just another case until he realized the voice belonged to his own daughter. On a quiet night in Brookdale, Officer Reyes traced a 911 call to an abandoned house. The terrified child inside wasn't just any victim. It was the one person he thought was safe, his daughter. The night had settled heavy over Brookdale, the kind of silence that swallowed sound until even the steady hum of a patrol cruiser felt intrusive. Officer Daniel Reyes sat behind the wheel, one hand on the steering column, the other idly tapping against his thigh in rhythm with the faint music bleeding from the radio. The streets were mostly empty at this hour, storefronts shuttered, traffic lights blinking yellow in lonely cycles. Nights like this usually meant paperwork, drowsy glances at the dashboard clock, and the ache of hours dragging toward dawn. He should have felt at ease, but Daniel never did, not fully. The uniform was supposed to mean protection, control, a shield against chaos. Yet somewhere inside him, buried beneath the badge, the training, the practiced calm, was a fracture that never seemed to heal. The divorce had been brutal, more war than parting. And when the dust settled, when lawyers and judges and bitter words had had their say, it left him with weekends that felt too short and a daughter who slipped further out of his reach with each passing month. The radio crackled to life, shattering his spiral of thought. Dispatch's voice cut through with the clipped urgency of someone trying to keep calm against a backdrop of panic. Unit 23, we've got a 911 call, possible child in distress. Caller whispered for help, female, sounded young. Then the line disconnected. Daniel's grip tightened on the wheel. Copy that, he said, though his throat had gone dry. The dispatcher read out the trace, 417 Pine Street. His heart skipped. He knew the place. Everyone did. It had been abandoned for years, a husk of a house rotting at the edge of town. Kids dared each other to go there on Halloween. Vandals spray-painted its cracked siding, but nobody stayed long. There were stories, of course, rumors of squatters, shadows seen in broken windows, the usual small-town folklore. But the fear in the voice on that call, that was no campfire tale. Daniel flicked on his lights, the red and blue strobing against empty buildings as he accelerated through the quiet streets. The town blurred by, lampposts casting pools of weak light, the scent of wet asphalt rising through his half-open window. And beneath it all, dread gnawed at him, burrowing deep, relentless. He tried to breathe through it, but his thoughts betrayed him, circling back to Lila, 10 years old with a smile that could undo him in an instant. The last time he saw her, she had pressed her face against his chest at drop-off, whispering, "Don't go yet." But the court orders were ironclad. He'd unclenched her tiny fingers from his sleeve and forced himself to walk away, her reflection shrinking in the rearview mirror like a ghost he wasn't allowed to keep. He thought about her voice, how soft it could be when she was afraid of thunderstorms, how insistent when she wanted him to read just one more story before bed. The memory collided with the echo of the 911 call. A whisper, a plea. It was the kind of sound that made a father's heart seize, even if it wasn't his child. But the thought crept in anyway. What if it had been Lila? The cruiser slowed as he turned down Pine Street, tires crunching over gravel and debris. The houses here sagged under years of neglect, windows boarded, porches collapsing into weeds. And then, looming ahead, the silhouette of 417. The house looked like it had been left behind by time itself, shutters hanging askew, paint peeled to the bone, roofline crooked against the night sky. It radiated something heavier than decay, something watchful. Daniel cut the engine, the sudden stillness almost deafening. He sat for a moment listening, nothing but the rasp of crickets and the thud of his own pulse. He rested a hand on the radio mic clipped to his vest, signaling in. Dispatch, Unit 23 on scene at Pine. House is dark. Proceeding to check it out. His voice was steady, professional, but inside he was unraveling. Every nerve screamed that something was wrong here, something more than the usual call. He stepped out into the cool night air, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. The house loomed taller now, oppressive, its windows like hollow eyes. Daniel's instincts, sharpened by years on the force, told him to move carefully, to wait for backup. But another instinct, older, more primal, throbbed harder, the instinct of a father who had heard a child cry out for help. He reached for his flashlight, beam slicing across the yard littered with toys that had no right to be there. A cracked plastic doll, a deflated ball, a jump rope tangled in weeds. His stomach clenched. These weren't relics of some forgotten family. They looked like they had been dropped mid-play, as if someone had been here not long ago. The silence pressed heavier now, wrapping around him as he stepped onto the warped front porch. The wood groaned beneath his weight. He tested the door. It gave a little under his touch, not locked, but resisting, as though the house itself didn't want him inside. Daniel drew in a breath, steadying his hands. Whatever waited in there, whoever that child had been, they needed him. And in some dark, buried part of him, he prayed he was wrong, that the voice he'd heard on the call wouldn't haunt him with familiarity, but the dread in his chest whispered otherwise. The porch complained under every shift of Daniel's weight, each creak too loud in the dead night. He paused, listening again. Still nothing but the thrum of insects, the whisper of branches swaying, and yet the air felt thick, like the world itself was holding its breath. He thumbed his flashlight, beams stabbing forward. The paint on the door had blistered and peeled like dry skin. A child's handprint, smeared in dirt or ash, marred the wood just above the handle. Karen Holt's cruiser rolled up behind him, its headlights washing the porch in stark white before cutting off. Daniel's partner climbed out, her boots crunching the gravel. She was younger, sharper around the edges, but she caught the tension in him immediately. "You waiting for me, Reyes? Or just trying to spook yourself?" she asked, voice hushed, though she hadn't meant it to be. He gestured at the door. 911 call, kid whispering for help, came from this address. Her brows furrowed, scanning the house. "This dump? Place looks condemned." "Doesn't mean no one's in there," he muttered. Karen flicked her hand toward the yard. Her light skimmed over the toys scattered in the weeds. "That's..." She trailed off, unsettled. "Yeah," Daniel said, already reaching for the handle. The door gave with a reluctant groan, opening into a void of stale air. The smell hit them first, rot layered over mildew, like a basement that had been shut too long. Dust caught the beams of their flashlights, floating like ash. The entryway yawned before them, stripped bare except for a toppled chair and fragments of shattered glass. Karen swept her light across the floor. "No footprints, nothing recent." Daniel shook his head. "That call came from here. I heard her. She was terrified." They advanced slowly. The floorboards sagged and moaned beneath them. Walls were covered in graffiti, angry scrawls of names, dates, symbols Daniel didn't recognize. A door to the left revealed a kitchen gutted of its appliances, cupboards hanging open like broken jaws. To the right, a living room collapsed inward, couch springs poking through torn fabric. But it wasn't the decay that made the hair on Daniel's arms rise. It was the silence. Not just the silence of emptiness, but the suffocating stillness of a place that didn't want to be disturbed. Then it came. A sound. Faint. Fleeting. A shuffle. Upstairs. Both officers froze. Karen mouthed, "You hear that?" Daniel's pulse quickened. His hand went to his holster, weapon sliding free. He gestured toward the staircase. They moved in unison, each step deliberate, flashlights cutting into corners. The staircase groaned under their ascent. Halfway up, Daniel's beam caught something on the wall. He leaned closer. Crayon marks. Scribbles in bright, desperate colors. Sun, house, stick figures with smiling faces. The drawings were fresh enough that the wax still shone faintly. He swallowed hard. Someone's been here. A kid. Karen's jaw tightened. What the hell is going on? At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched long and narrow, doors gaping open on either side. The air grew colder and thick with dust. Daniel swept his light across each threshold, a bathroom stripped bare, a bedroom filled with collapsed boxes, another door hanging off its hinges. And then, another sound, a whisper, almost too faint to catch. "Please." Daniel stopped cold, his chest constricted. He knew that word, that trembling cadence. His hand trembled as he pressed a finger to his lips, signaling Karen to stay quiet. The sound came again from the far end of the hall, a door shut tight. They moved closer. Daniel's breath came shallow, every step pounding like a drumbeat in his ears. He gripped the handle, metal cold against his palm. The door resisted, locked. Karen mouthed, "Kick it." Daniel nodded once. He braced, drove his boot against the wood. It splintered on the first blow, then swung open with a violent crack on the second. The beam of his flashlight pierced the darkness. The room was small, claustrophobic, its wallpaper peeling in long strips. In the corner, curled tight like a wounded animal, was a girl. Her wrists bore red welts where restraints had rubbed them raw. Her hair clung to her damp face. She flinched against the light, pressing herself deeper into the corner. Karen gasped. "Oh my God." Daniel's heart thundered. For a moment he couldn't breathe. The girl's silhouette, the slope of her shoulders, the whimper caught in her throat, It struck him like a lightning bolt of recognition. He lowered his weapon, voice breaking as he whispered, "It's okay, you're safe. We're here now." Slowly the girl lifted her head, her eyes caught the light. And Daniel's world stopped. The face staring back at him wasn't just any child, it was his daughter. Daniel's world narrowed to the trembling girl in the corner. The room, the peeling wallpaper, Karen's sharp intake of breath, it all blurred into static around him. His chest clenched as though invisible hands had seized his ribs. Lila. His voice cracked on the name. He hadn't spoken it aloud in weeks, maybe months, except to lawyers or to the empty air of his apartment. Now it felt jagged, fragile, spilling into a space that shouldn't contain her. Her eyes flickered wide at the sound. Recognition fought with fear. She wanted to trust it, but trust had been broken in this place. Karen stepped closer, confusion etched across her face. "Reyes, do you know her?" He couldn't even answer. His body moved before his mind caught up. He holstered his weapon, crouched low, hands out, palms open like he was approaching a wild creature. He didn't want to frighten her further. "It's me, sweetheart. It's Dad. I'm here now." His voice shook, stripped bare of the cop's command. It was the voice of a father who had lost too much time and was terrified he might lose everything else. Lila blinked hard, tears spilling over. Her lips moved, forming his name. Or maybe just the word Daddy. But her throat caught, strangled by sobs. Daniel's knees hit the floor. He didn't care about dust or the stink of rot or the gnawing question of how she'd gotten here. All that mattered was unfastening the rusted clasp at her wrist, prying apart the restraints that had left angry red marks on her small arms. His hands trembled so badly he fumbled, and Karen had to steady the flashlight so he could see. The second the restraints clattered to the floor, Lila lunged forward. She collided with his chest, clutching him like she was afraid the world might rip him away again. He folded around her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her thin shoulders. Daniel's heart broke in slow motion. She felt lighter than he remembered, too light, as if the place had been feeding on her strength. He pressed his lips to her hair, whispering over and over, "You're safe, you're safe, I've got you now." Karen's voice cut through, low and cautious. "Reyes, what the hell is she doing here? Did someone take her? Does your ex—" "Not now." His tone was sharp, desperate. The truth of Karen's question roared inside him like fire, but he shoved it down. He couldn't fracture here, not in front of his daughter. But then Lila spoke, voice cracked and small. "He said you wouldn't find me. He said nobody ever would." Daniel's blood went cold. He pulled back just enough to see her face. "Who said that? Who, Lila?" Her eyes darted toward the door. She clung tighter, as though afraid the answer might summon the monster back into the room. Karen swept the flashlight across the corners. Nothing. Empty walls. But the dread was growing, thick and suffocating. Daniel forced his voice calm. "Sweetheart, tell me what happened. Did someone bring you here? How long?" Lila shook her head violently, words tumbling out in fragments. "Don't make me say it. He listens. He's always listening." The officers froze. The air seemed to hum, as if the walls themselves held secrets. Daniel exchanged a glance with Karen, not the professional nod of partners, but the silent recognition that they'd stepped into something larger, darker than either of them understood. A sound broke the silence. From somewhere deeper in the house, a floorboard groaned. Not the settling of old timber, not the scurry of a rodent, a measured step. Karen whipped her gun up, aiming at the open doorway. Daniel's heart lurched into his throat. He gathered Lila tighter against him, moving her behind his body. "Show yourself!" Karen's voice rang down the hall, brittle with adrenaline. Nothing, only stillness. Then, another creak, farther away this time, as though whoever had been there was retreating into the bowels of the house. Daniel's instincts screamed to chase, to hunt down the shadow that had stolen his daughter's days and nights. But the father in him, the terrified man clutching the trembling girl, knew he couldn't leave her side. Karen's jaw tightened. "You stay with her. I'll clear the rest of the house." "No," Daniel snapped. He was already torn in half, cop and parent, protector and pursuer. Splitting again might break him. "We do this together." Karen hesitated, then gave a terse nod. Daniel lowered his voice, speaking into Lila's ear. "Don't move from this corner, sweetheart. We'll be right back." He placed his flashlight in her hands. "If it gets dark, you keep this on, okay?" Her tiny fingers clutched it like a lifeline. Then he rose, weapon drawn again, every nerve burning. The house seemed alive now, every groan of wood, every breath of air through broken windows charged with menace. As he and Karen stepped into the hall, Daniel knew two things with absolute certainty. Whoever had put his daughter here was still close, and this was no random nightmare. It was a message, and it was meant for him. The hallway swallowed them as they moved, Karen at Daniel's shoulder, both guns drawn. Their flashlights cut across the rotting wallpaper, catching patches of mold, rusty nails jutting from splintered beams, the skeleton of a house that should have stayed dead, but every detail screamed of habitation, fresh footprints in the dust, a faint smell of smoke, as though a match had been struck only minutes ago. The kind of signs that told cops they weren't chasing ghosts. Daniel's ears strained. Each floorboard's groan seemed to pulse under his skin, his heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the house. Behind them, Lila clutched the flashlight in the corner of the small room, its glow trembling in her little hands. He forced himself not to look back. If he did, he might never leave her side again. A sound came again, lower this time, a door closing somewhere beneath them. Daniel's breath caught. Whoever was here wasn't fleeing out into the night. They were moving deeper inside, staying close, waiting. Karen whispered, "Basement." The word felt like a curse. The basement door was at the far end of the hall, half hidden in shadow. They approached slowly, their lights converging on the knob. It hung loose as though it had been opened and closed 1,000 times. The wood around it was scarred with scratches, deep and frantic, as if someone had clawed to get out. Daniel's stomach churned. He thought of Lila's tiny wrists, the bruises. Had she been locked down there? How long? Karen gestured. On 3. He nodded, bracing. 1, 2. The door shrieked as it swung wide, revealing a set of stairs descending into blackness. The smell that wafted up was foul, sour and metallic, like rust and old blood. They descended, Daniel leading, every step slower than the last. The air grew colder, thick with damp. At the bottom, their lights fanned across a wide, low-ceilinged space. What they saw made Karen curse under her breath. The basement wasn't empty. It had been turned into a labyrinth of cages, rusted metal bars bolted into concrete, chains coiled on the floor, blankets matted with filth. In one corner, a pile of children's clothes, tiny shoes stacked like offerings. Daniel's stomach lurched. He fought the urge to double over. His brain screamed at him to shield Lila from ever seeing this place, to burn it to the ground so it could never touch another child again. "Jesus Christ," Karen whispered, her gun trembling slightly in her grip. Daniel moved his light across the cages. They were empty, for now. But his instincts told him this wasn't over. Someone had used this place, recently. Then, another sound, a metallic clang, behind them. They spun, light slashing across the concrete. A figure stood at the far wall, just at the edge of the shadows, tall, still, watching. Daniel's pulse spiked. "Police, step into the light." The figure didn't move. Karen's finger tightened on her trigger. "Do it now." Silence, then a laugh, low, distorted, crawling across the basement like oil. Daniel's breath hitched. That laugh, he knew it. He'd heard it at soccer games, in courtrooms, in the background of too many arguments with his ex-wife. No, it couldn't be. The figure stepped forward, just enough for the light to catch the edge of a face, a smirk carved deep into familiar features. It was her new partner, the man who'd moved into his daughter's life, who'd smiled through custody hearings with charm polished like armor. Daniel's vision tunneled. Rage detonated in his chest, white hot, his gun lifted, hands shaking with fury. "You!" he hissed. Karen shot him a look, startled. "Reyes, what the hell?" The man tilted his head, smirk widening. "Told her you'd never find her. Guess I was wrong, but you were always predictable." Daniel's blood roared in his ears. Every part of him screamed to pull the trigger, to end it here, to raise the monster who had dared touch his child. But even through the storm, one truth anchored him. Lila was upstairs, listening, watching. She needed her father, not a man undone by vengeance. Still, the basement seemed to breathe around them, chains rattling faintly, shadows curling. This wasn't just about Lila. The cages, the clothes, the list of names in the attic, they hinted at something sprawling, organized. His daughter was just one piece of it, and the man standing in front of him wasn't afraid. He was taunting, confident, as though even if Daniel arrested him now, the rot would keep spreading. Karen steadied her aim, hands where I can see them, now. The man chuckled again, raising his palms slowly, but his eyes locked on Daniel's, glittering with venom. "You're in over your head, officer. This is bigger than you, bigger than her." Daniel's grip tightened. The house groaned above them, as if it too was waiting for his decision. And in that moment, Daniel knew. Rescuing Lila was only the beginning. The night pressed down like a living weight, the kind that made silence throb louder than gunfire. Daniel's flashlight trembled slightly as he raised it toward the narrow stairwell leading down into the house's basement. The air here was different, damp, metallic, carrying the faint tang of rust and something else he couldn't name. Every step downward scraped a note of dread into his chest. He'd walked into hostage situations, drug dens, and back alley standoffs before, but something about this darkness that seemed to breathe back at him, set his nerves on edge. From somewhere below came the faintest sound. Not a word, not even a sob, just the shallow, rapid inhale of someone trying not to breathe too loudly. His gut clenched. He lowered his voice, calm and measured, though his pulse was anything but. "Hey, it's okay. You're not alone down here." The reply was silence except for the faint creak of shifting weight on old floorboards. Daniel swept the light across the concrete walls, rusted pipes, forgotten boxes, graffiti scrawled in angry, jagged handwriting. And there, against the far wall, a small figure crouched in the shadows. "Sweetheart." His voice cracked despite his training. "It's okay. I'm Officer Reyes. I'm here to help." The figure didn't move, but a whisper finally reached him. He said not to trust anyone, that he'd come back. Daniel's grip tightened on his flashlight. Whoever he was, he had already left a mark of terror on this child. Daniel edged closer, lowering himself to one knee, palms open to show he carried no threat. "Listen to me. Whoever hurt you isn't here now. I won't let him hurt you again." The girl shifted into the light, and for the first time Daniel saw her face. Pale, eyes rimmed red from crying, hair tangled as though she'd been hiding for hours. The sight hit him like a fist to the chest, not because she was another scared child in danger, but because every feature, from the curve of her jaw to the trembling lower lip, echoed the memory of his daughter, Lila. The resemblance was uncanny. His breath hitched. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, voice almost a whisper. She hesitated, then murmured, "Lila." The basement seemed to tilt around him. His ears rang. For a heartbeat, he thought he'd misheard. That fat ague or fear had warped his senses, but the way she said it, the softness, the familiarity, ripped through his composure. No, it couldn't be. His Lila was supposed to be safe with her mother, miles away, shielded from the violence he faced daily. And yet here she was. Daniel stumbled back a step, his training collapsing under the weight of raw disbelief. His flashlight beam wavered across the room, catching the girl's frightened eyes. They weren't just frightened, they were his daughter's eyes. "Daddy?" she whispered, and the sound shredded every layer of armor he'd built around himself. He froze, torn between two impossible truths. The reality he thought he knew, that his daughter was beyond harm, and the reality in front of him, where she crouched in a stranger's basement, whispering for help. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It thrummed with menace as though the very house was waiting for his reaction. Somewhere above, the floor groaned, faint but deliberate. Not the shifting of wood, not the sigh of an old house. Footsteps. Daniel's instincts screamed. They weren't alone. Whoever had taken her, whoever had dragged his daughter into this nightmare, was still here, watching, waiting. His training snapped back into place, sharpening around his terror. He pulled his sidearm, shielding Lila with his body, scanning the shadows that seemed to stretch longer, darker. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was war. And for the first time in years, Daniel knew exactly what he was fighting for: his daughter. The next sound wasn't the whisper of fear. It was the slow, deliberate creak of someone descending the stairs. The hunter had come back for his prey. The basement swallowed the sound of each descending footstep like a drumbeat of dread. Daniel's grip tightened on his sidearm, his body moving on instinct, shielding Lila as he pressed her closer against the far wall. Every muscle in him trembled, not from fear of the intruder, but from the unbearable truth that the little girl clinging to his arm was his daughter. "Stay behind me," he whispered, his voice steady though his chest thundered. The light beam caught the stairwell just as a figure emerged, broad-shouldered, face shadowed beneath a hood. The man paused on the bottom step, like he knew exactly how to use silence as a weapon. Daniel felt it. This wasn't some aimless vagrant. This was someone deliberate, someone who had planned. "Well," the man said, voice low, almost amused. "You got here faster than I expected, Officer Reyes." Daniel's blood ran cold. The way the man said his name, calm, practiced, wasn't chance. He wasn't a stranger. He knew him. "Let her go," Daniel growled, keeping his weapon trained. The hooded figure stepped forward, and the light fell across his face. Thin lips, angular jaw, and eyes that burned with bitter satisfaction. Recognition hit like a blade twisting in Daniel's gut. Victor Hayes. A name from his past. A man Daniel had arrested years ago in a case riddled with corruption. A man who had sworn vengeance through gritted teeth as he was dragged away in cuffs. Daniel had half forgotten him, another ghost from the job. But Hayes hadn't forgotten. He had waited, planned, struck where it would hurt most. "You thought locking me up was the end of it," Hayes said, his tone measured, venomous. "But prison gives you time to think, to study, to plan. I promised you I'd take something from you the way you took everything from me." Daniel's chest constricted, the pieces slammed together with sickening clarity. The abduction, the eerie phone call, the torment of finding his daughter in this hellhole. It wasn't random. It was personal. "You dragged my child into this?" Daniel's voice was raw, shaking now with rage. "You think this proves anything except how pathetic you are?" Hayes smiled thinly, and the smile was worse than a snarl. "Pathetic? No, precise. She was easy to reach, easier than you ever imagined. While you were busy patrolling your little streets, thinking you were some kind of protector, I was inside your life, watching, waiting." Behind him, Lila whimpered, and Daniel felt the sound tear through his resolve. He couldn't wait for backup. He couldn't risk Hayes lunging at her, not when the man's whole purpose was to destroy him. But Hayes wasn't finished. He raised a hand, and in it glinted a knife. Not large, but wicked. The kind of weapon made for control, not chaos. He tapped it against his thigh casually. "You've got two choices, Reyes," Hayes said. "You drop the gun, and I let her walk out of here alive. Or you fight me, and the last thing she remembers of her father is his body on the floor." Daniel's hand trembled on the trigger. He was a trained officer, conditioned to assess, to calculate. But no training manual covered this. A father facing down the devil with his daughter's life in the balance. His mind raced. He remembered her laugh when she was 5, the way she hugged him tight at the playground, the tears when she asked why he couldn't live with her anymore. He had already failed her once in the court system. He would not fail her now. His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "You're not taking her." The next moments exploded in a blur. Hayes lunged forward, knife flashing. Daniel sidestepped, firing a shot that ricocheted off the basement's pipes, sending sparks and steam erupting. The basement filled with hissing vapor, a ghostly curtain that turned every shadow into a threat. Daniel shoved Lila toward the stairwell. "Run!" he barked, even as Hayes slashed through the fog. But Lila froze, torn between terror and the instinct to stay near her father. Daniel's heart wrenched, but he didn't let hesitation show. He surged forward, grappling with Hayes, the knife glinting inches from his throat. They crashed into crates, wood splintering, echoes rattling through the hollow house. "Everything you love ends tonight," Hayes snarled, forcing the blade closer. Daniel roared, a sound pulled from the very marrow of his being, and twisted Hayes's wrist until the knife clattered to the floor. The two men slammed into the concrete, fists colliding, rage meeting desperation. For a heartbeat, Hayes's hand found Daniel's throat, squeezing, and Daniel's vision darkened. But then, like a spark, he heard it. "Daddy!" Lila screamed, her voice fierce despite her fear. That one word ignited something primal in him. With a surge of strength, Daniel broke free, seized Hayes by the collar, and drove him back against the wall with crushing force. His gun was there, within reach, and in one fluid motion, he leveled it. "End of the line," he said, voice iron. Hayes froze, chest heaving, eyes wide as the predator realized he had become the prey. For a long moment, the basement was nothing but the hiss of steam and the sound of Lila's ragged breathing. Daniel didn't pull the trigger, not yet. Killing Hayes would end the man, but it wouldn't heal the scars he'd already inflicted. Instead, Daniel kept the gun steady until the sirens pierced the night air above. Backup, at last. Hayes sneered, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Daniel didn't look at him again. He turned to his daughter, arms opening as she ran to him, sobbing into his chest. He held her like he never intended to let go again. The job, the divorce, the distance, it all faded into nothing. In that moment, the only truth that mattered was this: he had her back. And no one, not even the ghosts of his past, would ever take her away again.